Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And many thanks to Johanne Pelletier for presenting today. Johanne Pelletier is a postdoctoral consultant with SPIA. As in her role, she advises on and she integrates the Earth observations into the research portfolio. She earned her PhD at McGill University in Canada and with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. In this webinar, Joanne will be presenting the recent SPIA guideline that she's been working on the best practices for using remote sensing in impact evaluation of agriculture and natural resource management. The guidelines bring in learning from 11 case studies that use EO data for impact assessment and reflect on common challenges on how to address them. So we are very much looking forward to listen to you, Joanne. And we will have, I think we're planning for, am I correct me now? It's about 15 minutes of presentation with questions welcome also during the presentation and some time for discussion afterwards, so that it could be between an hour and an hour and a half, depending on how much discussion we have after the presentation. Mina, is it 45 or 50 minutes for the first presentation?
40 to 45 minutes. We'll have
40 to 45
There's
minutes.
lots of room for discussion.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much, Rashid. Mina, let me share my screen. So we can start. Just a little introduction about the guidelines. So the guidelines are as a way to provide information more to the use of remote sensing for impact evaluation in area that is connected to CGIAR activities. Definitely satellite-based Earth observation are measure of the physical environment of the Earth's surface that are taken by satellites that go around the Earth. The satellite observation capability has really increased with imagery that is available at higher spatial, spectral, temporal resolution than ever before. And it's still growing, so it's going to grow in the future. There's a lot of satellites that are planned to be launched soon. And so it expands the opportunity for what can be done with this data source. Space agencies and data providers now consider that data availability is no more a constraint. And now the challenge for them is to expand the reach to more global users. On the other hand, there's also a confluence of planetary crisis that we're facing. It really demands, there's a demand for data-driven, evidence-based policymaking that is growing. One example is a focus on effort under the Sustainable Development Goals to define specific target and build relevant indicator for monitoring progress towards these targets. Causal impact evaluation is one of the core part of this broader agenda for evidence-based policymaking. So it's very key that we can learn from intervention and be guided by actions based on past experience. And in development, especially, there's limited resources, so there's a push for using them efficiently towards what works to create impacts. So there's really a view at looking at what data and tools that can facilitate rigorous impact evaluation at scale, and often in a very short policy timeline to really sort of adapt policymaking to what we found and make better policies and implement better intervention that can have an impact for people. So definitely within the CGAR, remote sensing has been a very useful tool. There's been large-scale remote sensing projects that have been done. Both the SIAT and ICRISAT are hubs for the NASA Surveyor Applied Science Program for South America and for West Africa. Examples of research using remote sensing have been more into trying to target better innovation, that diffusion of innovation, evaluating the suitability of area, or also as input in like crop modeling, for example. So there's already a bulk of experience within the CG. But for impact evaluation, so far, there's limited experience, possibly because it's typically done from people with an economics background that rely more traditionally on household survey, while the Earth observation part has been more from the earth science background. So definitely it comes, that's the purpose of the guidelines, is to try to really bridge the gap between the different disciplines. So it's intended for a broad audience of researcher and practitioner within one CGIAR and beyond. And it's really to provide a non-technical overview and facilitate mutual understanding between researchers from different fields. It introduces a set of good practice that can support integration of Earth observation in impact evaluation in a way that's rigorous and that helps the planning and limit hurdles by avoiding pitfalls. It's also try to provide an honest account of potential opportunity, potential difficulty, and how to avoid them. So it's include also with what Rashid was saying, strategic insight from real world case studies that are coming from the research context. So just to give you a bit of a view of how the guidelines were made. So it's based a lot from the input of 11 case studies who were used remote sensing to do impact evaluation in different contexts. So we use virtual interview with the research team. We also did the literature review of the remote sensing sector and evaluated the state of knowledge. So it's really looking at, okay, what are the recent papers telling us about, what are the recommendations and what can be applied right now with remote sensing. So it brings you to the recent time of where we are with remote sensing, and also look at the targets from initiative, trying to see, okay, what people in the CG are trying to measure and what can be done with Earth observation right now. So so it integrates best practice, state of knowledge on remote sensing application, and try to make it refocus on what the CG wants to measure. So in terms of the 11 case study, some case studies are measuring adoption, others are measuring outcomes, and others are measuring both. All these research were funded by SPIA because of the high quality of their methodology. They usually look at one innovation and in most of them in one country. And so these are CG innovation. And so I will talk about most of them today, but not all. And so I use this case study to illustrate what kind of challenge a project can face and how it can be solved, what the project has done to overcome this challenge. So to give some ideas to researchers. So just to start, so the goal of a causal impact evaluation in the CGIAR context is to measure adoption of a particular innovation and to quantify how this adoption affects processes or outcomes. So for example, poverty, yield, greenhouse gas emission in some study population and over some period of time. So traditionally, this data collection is done with field-based method and through direct observation of newly introduced technology adoption or innovation and outcomes using household survey. So what do you need for actually user Earth observation for impact evaluation? It's feasible when there is a spatially explicit identifier for the innovation that's being evaluated. So we need to know where it is. So for example, you can have adoption that's provided by a data set that is related to one specific area. For example, this data set can be at the district level or the village level, but then you can merge spatial information about spatial administrative boundary to the data on adoption to have a spatial data on adoption. And then you would use that information. And then you will use Earth observation to measure outcomes. There's also time when this information is not available. Often if, for example, it was developed a long time ago, there might not be a good data set that has tracked adoption. So it might be an interest of measuring adoption. So there is two main type of modeled remote sensing output. For example, so the map that you want to produce, you can want to produce a thematic map, so a map of a categorical variable. So for example, you have classes for forests, crop, and often the classification is one of the output when you want to measure adoption. So you will have a binary map that you want to create. So you will use remote sensing images, and your output for adoption will be a map with adoption, non-adoption. So that's often the type of product that you will be generating. There's also continuous map that are made through regression. So for example, this is the amount of soil organic carbon stock for Zambia. So it's a continuous variable. And most of the time that's gonna be the main type of output or when you're trying to measure outcomes. So one example of that is the study on conservation agriculture in India. So the project used Earth observation to measure adoption. And to do that, there's two key conditions that must be present. One, you need to be able to observe or detect the adoption visually on the satellite image or make it detectable through analysis. Or there needs to be a visual difference or contrast in space and time of who has adopted and who has not. So there needs to be heterogeneity. So if everybody adopts, then you don't have this heterogeneity, and the same if nobody. Well, maybe you don't want to measure that. Or maybe that's not a good impact evaluation to dedicate your time to. Definitely the goal of this project was to differentiate field with and without tillage. And they were able to do that because there's a visible difference on the imagery. So the project used remote sensing and household survey to measure the scale of adoption in 4 Indian states. They first mapped cropland, non-cropland using Sentinel-2. And then from this subset of area, they relied on Sentinel-1 radar data to characterize zero tillage and conventional tillage using a random forest classifier. So now if you want to measure outcomes, definitely you are trying to see often measuring the impact by comparing the change in one outcome variable, let's say yield, between a baseline and the intervention. So before adoption and after adoption in both treatment, those that have adopted and control area. So we're interested in the change. So in most cases, that's going to be a continuous variable that we're measuring at 2 or more points in time. In remote sensing, what it means is that we will want to use methods of change detection, which look at a small number of images from distinct times, or time series analysis that use a time series of imagery. So measuring outcomes with our observation involve identifying in satellite imagery, mostly spectral information, that correlates with an outcome of interest, and looking at the change, so analyzing the change in this correlates or proxy. So you want to find a proxy variable that has a very close correlation with the outcome of interest. So that's why often for mapping yield, people will use NDVI or other vegetation index. But so you need to make sure that there's this strong correlation with the outcome, and that this proxy that you're using is sensitive to change. So definitely it's important that it's sensitive to change, in that it's based on a very good, well-validated relationship between the outcome and the imagery that you're using. So why are we so interested in using Earth observation data? What's the advantage compared to traditional methods? So definitely there's a new opportunity that comes with Earth observation data to complement what's already done with traditional survey, and in a way that could improve the rigor and scope of impact evaluation. So we're really at a golden age of satellite Earth observation. And so satellite offer a good spatial coverage, including in a remote area. So with survey, you can go to some specific location, but then with remote sensing, you can actually get wall-to-wall map of the variable of interest. So that's definitely one of the advantage. You can, with satellite data, you can work in remote area, and it's not as painful as if you have to get there by foot, even if at the end of the day, you still need information from the ground. There's also a long time series of remote sensing observation. So one example is definitely Landsat, that has more than 50 years of existence. So it's a really great data set, especially for innovation or that have been introduced many years ago. So often we need to go and look back in time quite a lot. So there's also MODIS, that is a very long time series of information. Earth observation data is collected regularly and repeatedly. It provides consistent, comparable, standardized measurement over time. So sometimes, for example, in a survey, there's going to be change in some questions that makes it not so comparable with the survey that was done after. But Earth observation, you can have pretty standardized measurements. There's also more and more offer of what is available with more complementarity. So this is the NASA fleet of satellites. So you have different satellites for different purpose. Landsat 9, you have OCO2, Terra Aqua for MODIS, SMAP for soil, moisture. And so there's a lot of choices. JEDI, that's on the International Space Station, measuring, with providing LiDAR measurement. And from the European Space Agency, there's even other selection, including Sentinel-1 synthetic aperture radar. So it's remote sensing can be very complementary to other data sources that are used, and it's often free, open to the public, and there's an increasing number of geospatial data set that's made available. But so people can get very excited about the expectation of what can be done with Earth observation. And it's true, there's a lot of new opportunity that comes from satellite remote sensing, but there's also real challenges for its use in impact evaluation. So the major part of my presentation today is going to focus on these methodological challenges and how to overcome them or avoid pitfalls. So a major part of what I'm talking today is how to mitigate challenges or avoid them, so that we can take the beautiful slope of enlightenment and reach a perfect plateau of productivity. So all the case study that I'm presenting today will help illustrate challenges that project can face and what we can learn from them. So now let's talk of existing geospatial remote sensing products. So these products are created by scientific teams through processing and analysis of satellite dataset, and they are made available to the public. So there's in the last 10 and 15 years, there has been a very large growth of the amount of global and regional geospatial products that's available out there for people to use. So when looking to use what we call off-the-shelf geospatial products, something that's very important is to know how it was made. So it's really to gather a good understanding of the product's characteristic, including the spatial, temporal resolution, the extent, the different layers or band, and how it was generated. It's done by reading the documentation accompanying the product, so the user guide, journal, the methods in the journal, and metadata for the dataset. And like any other dataset, existing Earth observation products may have some intrinsic technical issue. There might be some technical issue that will not be adequate for your own purpose. So sometimes it might just not be ideal for measuring impacts because of the characteristic of the product that may not apply to the context of your work, of the intervention you're trying to measure. Sometimes it can be really obvious, but sometimes it can be more subtle. So that's why it's important to look at this. Existing product may not well represent the local context. So just to give you an example of that, during my PhD, I worked in Western Panama in a protected area called Bosque Protector de Palo Seco. And I compare governmental data of deforestation and the global forest cover loss product published by Ensign and in 2013. And so for the period of overlap between these two analyses, so the 2000 to 2008 period, the government estimated deforestation to 11,000 hectares, while the Ensign product at 2,000 hectares. So definitely it's hard to reconcile these numbers. Definitely the area is complex. There's a lot of agroforestry going on, especially cocoa agroforestry and shifting cultivation. But definitely sometimes it means that global products just are not well representing the area of interest that you're trying to work with. So in other case, there's like, just as there's several competing products that may exist, but have very divergent value. Another example comes with one of the case study on stress-tolerant rice variety in Bangladesh. So the case study aimed to assess if stress-tolerant rice variety introduced more than a decade ago in Bangladesh has succeeded in reducing yield loss due to flooding in rice fields. So they need to capture flood before the adoption and after the introduction. So they were looking at off-the-shelf flood dataset that went back more than a decade. So they tried a dataset from the Dartmouth Flood Observatory by comparing other products of flood data from 10 years ago, and they found out that it was not comprehensive enough. So after looking at it and comparing with other data sources, they found one thing that was actually explained on the website, but it's not always clear the implication that this has. For example, the websites that the statistics presented are derived from a wide variety of news and governmental sources. The quality of and quantity of information available for a particular flood is not always in proportion to its actual magnitude and intensity of news coverage. It varies from nation to nation. So definitely the way they would capture flood is if it appeared in the news. So that's how this data set was built. So if there was the news of a flood, they will map it. But then definitely it can underrepresent and underestimate flood. So definitely this warning is not so clear in terms of what it means in reality. But then after analyzing the quality, they decided to go for another data set, the Global Flood Database, that provide a more consistent historical information on flood. Another set of challenges is related to, for example, if your project assesses that there's no off-the-shelf product that exists and that's suitable for your goal, then you can look at trying to build your own product. So one challenge in doing that is what Earth observation data is available and looking at the trade-offs. So definitely the availability and quality of remote sensing data is not all uniform. So in some area, you have more data than other, and there's different factors that can affect the availability of images, in particular the quality. So sometimes the quality is so degraded that you can't even use it. In some countries, there was an evaluation that more, for example, in Panama or other tropical countries, there's more cloud cover. The cloud coverage during the year is so strong that 86% of Landsat imagery was not usable for this reason. So cloud, haze, seasonality, topography are all elements that can constrain the quality of optical satellite imagery. And also there's not an equal amount of satellite imagery, especially for the 90s, there was less availability. Some countries have more. So here is a map of ground receiving station, so that capture imagery that as it gets collected. So definitely in some area like Central America or the region of Africa, there's less ground station, and so there's less imagery that gets collected. So it's not equally available everywhere. There's other, so I discussed a bit of the term of trade-off. So sorry, I forgot to change the slide, but just to let you know that there's cloud, haze, topography that affect, and the ground station that I was mentioning over the world, and the difference between countries. So it's not equivalent to the representation of what's available everywhere. So I discuss about trade-offs. So trade-offs can be between some imagery and others. So for example, some character, they all come with their own characteristic, but then there's also trade-off in terms of cost and what you can do. That's one of the challenges that was faced by the case study on demi-lune rainwater harvesting in Niger. So they face trade-off, not so much in comparing the type of imagery that was available for them, but in terms of project goal and cost. So the demi-lune or half moon are structure that will retain water flowing down the slope. And so it forms a sort of temporary pond that will make the soil more moist. So the demi-lune projects study the impact of these structure that are about 1 meter by 4 meters in the Zinder region of Niger. One of the goals was to map the adoption, disadoption, and spillover of these demi-lune at a regional scale. So as you can see on the left, they are visible, clearly visible in Google Earth image that has generally a pixel resolution of about 0.5 meter. But then in the imagery that could be available for free for a project in Planet Scope imagery, it was really not visible. So because one of the goal was to create a method that could be transferred to the Niger government to monitor the practice at scale. The cost of the very high resolution was prohibitive and against their objective of technology transfer to the government. So they shifted their objective and focused rather more on measuring the impact on soil moisture and productivity using PlanetScope and Sentinel-2, which are available for free, and that then could be transferred as an approach. So there's problem with availability. There's an issue with trade-off that projects need to be aware of, and not just assume that it's all available everywhere. So at the project onset, it's important to have this in mind. Another issue is about preprocessing. So preprocessing are operation that will correct distortion, noise in an image in order to make it more useful for the user. So it's very important to do these pre-processing steps for the imagery in order to make them comparable over time and in space. So if you're just working in an area and you have one image that cover your area and you're not looking at change in time, okay, pre-processing is not as important. But then if as soon as your study of area is greater than one image, or that you're looking at the change over time, then pre-processing is mandatory to avoid introducing bias in your analysis. So because really what it does, it's correcting for distortion and noise, and it's a very important step. Because impact evaluation entails a comparison in time of outcome variables, pre-processing steps are very important, and failing to perform these corrections upfront will definitely introduce systematic error in impact result down the road. So fortunately, space agencies and other organizations are working to increase the offer of analysis-ready data. So this is an illustration of analysis-ready data for Landsat. So now it's being done for, I think it's finalized for the continental United States. And there's a project going on to expand it to globally. So soon it's going to be easier and user will be able to access analyst-ready data, so data that has been pre-processed. So what I mean by pre-processing step, just some step that I'm mentioning here, it's atmospheric correction. It's basically, so on the left, it's before, and then on the right, it's after in the upper left. It's really to remove the atmosphere effect. So you have the satellite that's in space, and between the ground surface and the satellite, there's the atmosphere that can be filled with water vapor that affects really the detection of what's clearly on the ground. So the atmospheric correction is to remove this effect and so arrive at a surface reflectance. So from top of the atmosphere to bottom of the atmosphere. There's also geometric correction. So it takes the raw image and it grounds it into specific known location on the ground and account for elevation. So to really put it kind of like a sheet of paper on something that's not uniform, you want to really connect it so the location on your image are actual location on the ground, and there's this match that happens. There's also, cloud and shade that you will want to remove. So it's also some pre-processing step that you will want to do. So because cloud and shade haze can affect your result because it's sort of missing data basically. Other satellites, or for example, Sentinel-1 as so there's a workflow to actually pre-process your image. So this is an example for Sentinel-1. So I'm not going to go into depth with this, but just to let you know that for each imagery, there's some step that needs to be done before the image can be actually analyzed per se. There's been some project that has faced challenges definitely with pre-processing. So this research project is on index-based livestock insurance and takes place in Ethiopia and Kenya. So as most of you know, the index-based livestock insurance help protect pastoralist herd against drought, mortality of livestock. So when there's drought, it can really affect kill livestock. And so this the goal of the project was to actually understand the long-term rangeland ecosystem health outcome in Ethiopia and Kenya. So the project has been constructing a new Earth observation-based composite measure of rangeland health. Just like for our health, it's not just my heart rate that's a sign of good health. It's also a combination of indicator that they retrieve from remote sensing. So the project faced a challenge because during the pandemic, they had planned their field work and that was completely stopped because of the pandemic travel restriction. So they had to adapt to these restrictions, and they use previously collected geolocated photograph to observe the ground condition. And they also got information through their collaboration with the US Department of Agriculture. They were able to acquire thousands of very high resolution imagery from GeoEye 1, Worldview 1, 2, and 3. But the problem with that, so they wanted to use this information for classification. But because the zone is very large and they had so much, so to create a mosaic with all these very high resolution imagery, they found a big challenge because of they were collected from different sensor at different resolution, different viewing angle, and different illumination condition that really showed a major difference in reflectance. So they had to spend a very long time to pre-process their imagery to make it usable. Another element that has been important across the project is about the theme of reference data. So definitely reference data is a key issue for remote sensing in general and in impact evaluation. So reference data is used in three main ways. So you use reference data to interpret what's on the ground, to train or calibrate your model, or to for validation. So to look at how good your model is performing. So there's two main types of reference data. It can come from other remote sensing data, such as reference, very high resolution imagery, aerial photo or drone imaging, or they can come from georeference ground measurements, which are location collected on the ground with a GPS or other locating device, and that is associated with some survey response or other ground biophysical measurement that's taken. So the type and source of the reference data depends on the availability of and the type of output being created. These people you see on the pictures are Boniface Amalambo and Victoria Kawangu, who were collaborators on a project to look at active charcoal kiln in Zambia. So we used the tracking function on the GPS to go around the area of impact for charcoal production. So you can see on the right, the red is the area of impact for one kiln.
Johanne, you already slightly more than 45 minutes, which was the time that we had in mind for the presentation time. Do you want to take a maximum 10 more minutes to finish your presentation so that we can leave time for discussion?
Okay.
Great.
So it's been 25 minutes, but we said 45.
It's been 45. It has been 45 minutes.
45 minutes. Oh my God. Okay. So let me get on to, so it's been a major challenge with the amount of challenges that people have faced is related to in projects related to lack of historical data, inaccessibility to bureaucratic constraint, and deficiency in planning of field data and other factors. So it's the most challenging thing for most projects. So I will skip some area. So it's a main barrier, and definitely there can be introduction of error in reference data acquisition. So it's important to try to minimize error. So source of error can be temporal mismatch, a problem with a unbalanced design in terms of, so I'm not going to go through all of them because of time constraint. In terms of validation, there's of Earth observation product. It's really related to trying to compare the product with reference data. And the key point is to use an independent validation data set than the one that was used for training the model. So it's going to be different for classification and for regression. One project that did exactly that is the project on sorghum millet intensification project in Mali. So the aim was to provide a quantitative evidence of the impact of sorghum and millet upscaling program in the Spatial region. So they were looking at the impact of intensification on land use and cover change using 3 measures, tree cover, croplet extent, and landscape configuration. And so they built a disk-based protocol using a very high resolution imagery to collect training data. And they kept aside all the field data collected in Mali for validation purpose only. Definitely, as we measure remote sensing, we create remote sensing product. Each product has its own accuracy. And so in validation, we will evaluate the accuracy of these products, but then they can contain both random or systematic error. So it's important to really try to reduce error from the onset. So for example, the Happy Cedar project, they are studying the impact of adoption of direct cedar on emission from crop residue burning. So they analyze Sentinel-2 image to map field with conventional and zero tillage. And the technology adoption is assessed with household survey. So they looked at air pollution measure from detecting fire with modest burn area in Sentinel-2. So what they notice is that definitely crop burning can affect the quality of images. So, and this could introduce error, systematic error in their image. So they were really interested in making sure that the smoke that's created by the burning is not affecting their image and their analysis. There's other cases where a lot of different products are created. And so for each product, for example, with this case study on evaluating a direct seed marketing program in Ethiopia, there's many products that are created, and so uncertainty can really propagate in the workflow. So the government launched in 2011 a program to create improved seed and then make it more available to smallholder farmer by partially liberalizing seed market for a wider range of certified seed provider. And so definitely there is no annual crop map that was made to identify some crop before 2011 and for after. So for this project, the goal is to recreate this crop map and then look at phenology. But because there's a lot of products that needs to be created from scratch, there's definitely the possibility of compound uncertainty. So one of the solutions is to zoom into this a subset of the study area. So another issue is about the scale. So normally with impact evaluation, you have results at just one single scale when it's non-spatial, but when you include our observation, it involves other possible scale that you can analyze your work. So the modifiable areal unit problem is refers to the sensitivity of statistical result to change in spatial unit analysis. So you have the aggregation and zonation. So one example that I saw of that is from in my work looking at the relationship between input subsidy and smallholder farmer and forest cover loss. So at the district level, we just had data on amount of fertilizer, and you could see that forest cover loss was negatively correlated with the amount of fertilizer. But then when we looked at the ward level, which was like much more fine scale and closer to the actual behavior of the farmer, the relationship was like much more complex. And it's actually the amount of improved seed that was found more important. So definitely we recommend to use a scale that is closer to the decision-making process or behavior so that it can better represent the relationship with the scale. Another issue is with, sorry, I'm skipping a bit ahead, but is with spatial correlation. So if things are not structured in space, for example, a population that's not, as you can see on the map, that would look like this elevation. So we know that things are structuring in space, and that has an impact on what is happening. So one of the case study also address spatial correlation. So improved forage create intense rooting that can reduce soil erosion, and has been found as a win-win strategy in terms of livelihood and soil. So the team on working on the improved forage in the Ethiopian island collected perimeter of the main land uses at different sites. They they wanted to classify imagery to measure, to map improved forage adoption using Sentinel-2 and using a classifier that captured the phenological stages of the vegetation. So one of the challenge was that the improved forage area that's adopted is very small compared to the other land use. So to solve this issue, there was developed a method that avoid undersampling problem and address the spatial correlation by using a geographic block bootstrap unbalanced approach to balance out the number of pixels that is selected within each land use. Finally, the last of the challenge is related to the transferability across landscape. So definitely among projects, they found that the level of accuracy of remote sensing product will differ between landscapes. So it's important to really bring what are the limitations of the method and what accuracy you can get. So in order to transfer method and model to other area, it's recommended to use pilot study in order to adjust to the social and ecological context. And so some remote sensing methods are more generalizable than others. One of the case study that transfer their method from other area is the restoration of the commons in India. So they aim at measuring the impact of restoration using the carbon sequestration in vegetation and soil. And so they applied this land degradation surveillance framework that was originally developed in Mali and is now implemented with the same method in 25 countries and 60 sites. So they use consistent methodology, and that allow them to apply this methodology that link field measurement and remote sensing data that use MODIS, Landsat, Sentinel-2, and to apply it in the Indian context to and transfer it. But so the structure of the method allow them to do that easily and transfer context. So we receive also strategic insight from the teams. So definitely this is information that it's not available in publication usually, but it's kind of experience that people shared with us. So it's recruiting a remote sensing expert at the very beginning.
Johanne?
Yes?
Excuse me. Now you're 1 hour into the presentation, so we really need to wrap up so that we can leave time for discussion. Please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that would be so long. So teams share different expertise. So I invite you to go look into that. It's very informative. There's also a whole analysis of satellite-based indicator that are relevant to the 5 impact area of 1 CGAR, and what's the readiness level and adequacy of these resources. Also, what you will find in the guidelines is a different annex that provide information on Earth observation data provider, data set, global indicator that are relevant to 1 CGAR strategic goal, satellite sensor and their characteristic, and some online tutorial that are using open source remote sensing. So I would like to acknowledge people that have participated in interview, especially James Stevenson and Karen McCord helped for really develop these guidelines, and we are grateful for their support. And thank you so much. I apologize for taking so long.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for the presentation. We were lucky to get the opportunity to learn a lot from all this work and looking at the 11 case studies and getting some lessons. So let's open the floor immediately for discussions, for questions first. So who has questions? I'm looking at the chat. Okay, that doesn't look like more chat question, but please just raise your hand and or jump in and start talking if you have any question.
Yeah, I think
comments.
What could be also great is if participants have had experience using Earth observations for impact evaluation and that they want to share on their experience. That will also be really good.
There's Berber is jumping out, but leaving a comment. I'm having to drop off, but I think this is really interesting work. I noted that quite a few of the studies don't have LMIC, low and middle income countries researchers, and I'm wondering if there's a role for SPIA to play there, build more capacity or expand partnerships to include low and middle income countries researchers with expertise in EO. Do you want to comment on this? Like the presence of researchers from low and middle income countries. Not sure whether it's your role to answer.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, definitely, I don't know if.
But any experience on the interaction of, do you see reasons why it's particularly difficult to have researchers from low and middle income countries being involved in this?
Yeah, I don't think that. I think there's researcher from this country. Maybe they didn't learn about the call, but I think there's definitely expertise, just as in the CGR, the fact that SIAT and ICRISAT are hubs for the NASA Surveyor Applied Science Program. But I think there's definitely room for growth in terms of user and people that can really use Earth observation data. But yes, it as teams commented, remote sensing science is a specialized knowledge that takes time to acquire. So definitely, I think that if there's this feeling that there's a need for more, I think that's definitely a good. It's noted by SPIA. I think it's something that we can note and see what can be done.
Great, fantastic. More comments, more questions? Maybe meanwhile, someone gets inspired with more questions. One thing I think many of us have questions and the lack of clarity and thinking more as consumers than those that will necessarily program this, but those that can cooperate with people that can do that can make use of spatial data. Of how far, what is it that we know we can measure pretty well? What is it that we don't? Usually, are we comfortable enough that we can measure yield for most of the main crops? For example, if we think of soil characteristics, how far are we in terms of which soil characteristics we think we can capture or not? I think, let's say, some ideas of what we think now we're getting pretty good at measuring and what we are not. So maybe you cannot cover everything, but maybe a very quick overview on this, and or whether there is more in the report on really.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there is more in the report. There's a whole section where actually we review the state of knowledge of where we are with the measurements and also looking at readiness of Earth observation. Because this process has also been done for the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at what indicator can be well measured by Earth observation. And so there's definitely an evaluation of, okay, what are we really, the methods are available and ready for providing accurate measurements. So it's divided in different impact area from the one CGR. And so it's really providing an overview of what we can adequately measure with this, and with remote sensing. Definitely soil, it's there's products out there that are based on global models, and it will depend on the area. So each time you apply a model, as I said, you need to verify if it's applicable for the area of interest. For example, if the underlying data was good enough to represent the zone correctly. I see a raised
Question
hand.
from Marie-Charlotte.
Yes,
Go ahead,
hi,
please.
Thanks, Johanne, for your presentation. That's very interesting, and I'll try to go through the guidelines as well. Well, the small question I have is on the practicality, and you, toward the end of your presentation, you briefly shared some tips, and I'm especially wondering how you bridge the disciplines. Well, yes, obviously you need a remote sensing expert to be in your team. That's kind of the starting point and the obvious one. But how you make sure that you have the common language, the common understanding.
Yeah.
Well, them to understand the need of data, the type of data that we need as impact evaluation specialists, and vice versa. So how you make that connection happen? That's around the multidisciplinarity of this type of work. Yeah.
Yes, thanks for the question, because I didn't get the chance to talk so much about this, but there was really interesting input from projects. And so some projects started mostly designing the project from an economic side, and then the person with Earth observation got introduced later. And I think they sort of thought it would have worked much better if the person was included on the onset, like so from the beginning, to get their input. Definitely, it's what people have discussed, is to be able to dedicate the time and have the willingness to learn, to create this mutual understanding. So it takes time and effort. Also, having a bridge person that has an interdisciplinary background on the team can help improve the communication and understanding between team members. That's I think that's a bit of the insights that team provided. And also definitely being willing to learn. And I hope that these guidelines can really help people get started and think about projects that they would like to do with this data source. Because there's a lot of opportunity, but so it's good to get people creative and thinking about what can be done. So
Thanks a lot. Any other question? Well, I think if there's no more question, then thank you so much, Johanne, for all this work, not only for the presentation today, but also for all the work that's behind this. And I hope that many people will get to the guidelines and look at it and learn much more and get started. I think it's really targeting not necessarily the one that is doing the remote sensing programming, but the economist that hopes to work with people that work with remote sensing data. Obviously, they would not be able to do it on their own if they're not used to working with this data, but at least having a better idea of what's feasible, what are the challenges, and how we can get to this. So I highly recommend people to look at these guidelines and review it, or get at least the pieces of information that's useful to each one of us. Thank you so much, Johanne.
Thank you very much, Rashid. Yes, it's very our hope that it can stimulate more work and that it can improve like collaboration between different disciplines and seize the opportunity that Earth observation can bring. So I hope people check it out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you so
Thanks everyone
much.
for being here and holding until this
Yeah, thank
time.
you. Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks. Have a good
Bye
rest of
bye.
your day.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Miguel.
Mhm.